This meeting of the Senate Judiciary Committee will come to order. Today we're going to vote on 5 judicial nominees and 1 bill as 3635, the Public Safety Officer Support Act, introduced by Senators Duckworth, Cornyn, sponsored by myself, Senator Tillis, Booker, and Leahy. An additional 5 nominees have been listed for the first time, will be held over at the request of the minority. They include Judge John Lee for the 7th Circuit, Judge Salvador Mendoza for the 9th, Judge Stephen Locher for the Southern District of Iowa, Nancy Maldonado for the Northern District of Illinois, and Gregory Williams for the District of Delaware. Before we turn to the agenda, I'll make some remarks about this week's events and then, of course, turn to Senator Grassley. We will consider the nominees in order listed on the agenda, and I'll speak about each agenda item as we consider it. In the hours since we learned about the devastating mass shooting at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, one message has come in loud and clear from the American people to Congress: do something. Do something. This committee is the committee that has to do something. It is our responsibility, it is our jurisdiction, it is our moral duty. This committee held a confirmation hearing this week on the nomination of former U.S. Attorney Steve Dettelbach to serve as director of ATF. This is the primary federal agency tasked with investigating gun crimes. There has not been a confirmed ATF director in 7 years, since 2015. Mr. Dettelbach is well qualified. He has strong backing from law enforcement, including the National Sheriff's Association. It's time to confirm a director of the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Agency. Mr. Dettelbach will receive a prompt vote from this committee. We also have the opportunity to pass legislation to help reduce gun crime and deadly shootings. We have held so far in this last year and few months 7 hearings on gun violence so far in this Congress. A few more coming in the approaching weeks. But we need to do more than hold a hearing. We need to vote. There are 2 bipartisan bills that have passed the House of Representatives sitting on the Senate calendar. Both would close long-standing gaps in the background check system that have been exploited by criminals and mass shooters. Excuse me. The Senate should vote on these bills. They won't prevent every shooting, but they will prevent many. Making sure a person passes a background check before getting a gun is just common sense. Nobody wants to knowingly sell a gun to a convicted felon or someone who is ineligible for a legal purchase of the gun in this country. There are other important proposals from members of this committee. For example, Senators Blumenthal, Feinstein, and Graham have all worked on legislation to help administer extreme risk protection orders, the so-called red flag laws. We can advance those efforts. They can help. Senator Leahy and I have joined with Senator Collins on a bill to make straw purchasing a federal criminal offense rather than just a paperwork violation. I've told the story repeatedly in this committee about the killing of policewoman Ella French last year in Chicago. It was a devastating event, still felt in the community. She was killed with a gun that had been the subject of a straw purchase. These are ideas that will help keep guns out of dangerous hands while preserving Second Amendment rights. I know the issue of guns is politically contentious, but when we have more than 1 mass shooting per day, as we have had this year in America, when children are gunned down in their classrooms, we need to put partisan differences aside and work together. I'm ready to do my part. I don't know if what happened in Uvalde and what happened in Buffalo represented a turning point in America. I pray that it did. This has gone on for way too long. I received panicky messages, panicky is not the word, worrisome messages from members of my own family about my children and grandchildren. I'll bet you've received the same. They just worry about sending them to school, to a classroom, letting them play on a playground anymore. Is this America? Can we accept this? We ran for office to do something to make this country better. This is the place where we should do it, starting with this committee, starting with this Senate. We need to do our part. We've had all sorts of excuses for delay. I don't think they apply anymore. I think people want us to do something and will hold us accountable. Senator Grassley.
It's sad that we have to go through what we've gone through this week in Texas. We're reminded of it almost every hour on television as they discuss it. And the families that have been hurt or the families that want to be protected obviously deserve that attention, and we need to give it that attention. And I hope we can do that. Yesterday at one of our hearings, I discussed my EAGLE Act. I'm not going to go into detail about that except just to say that it would give school officials and others training they need to recognize the sign of persons mobilizing to violence or intervention, either harm to themselves or harm to others. But I also would like to bring up another bill that I've been involved in that's been around the Congress for a few years, a bill I've worked with Senator Cruz and Tillis. We entitle that bill Protecting Communities and Preserving the Second Amendment Act. This bill would help block dangerous people from getting guns, from ensuring that agencies and institutions submit accurate records to the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. We know that as NICS here. Now, this isn't the only time. We've already passed some legislation, I think, led by Senator Cornyn in that area, and maybe other members of this committee as well. But there's still more needs to be done with NICS. The bill would also create 2 new criminal offenses targeting what I've heard from my colleagues is a problem, straw purchases of firearms, and it would strengthen penalties for gun trafficking and other what we refer to as lying and buying offenses. These new penalties give law enforcement the tools they need to prosecute and punish individuals who commit heinous crimes with the use of getting guns that they aren't entitled to or without the proper check. I've invited my Democrat colleagues to talk with me about this bill in the past. I think even in the last 12 months I've had a chance to make that statement on the floor, and I haven't gotten any response. This offer is still open. It will make a real difference in combating mass shootings. Now to the agenda for today. I'm going to support Judge Childs. She said she doesn't believe in a living constitution. She's worked on administrative law at both the state and federal levels. And of course, that area of law, administrative law, is a uniquely large part of the DC docket. Senator Graham has been a strong supporter of hers, and she's been a district court judge in his home state for more than a decade. Given her administrative law experience and Senator Graham's support, I think she has as good of a pick as we could expect for this very important DC circuit that we consider the second most important appeals court in our system of justice. I'll also say that I was more likely to support her after seeing how dishonest some liberal dark money groups were campaigning against her when she was a possible nominee to the Supreme Court. Nominees that I'll oppose, 3 are some the most activist judicial nominees that we've seen. Nancy Abudu decided to work for the Southern Poverty Law Center in 2019, despite years of broad public concern about the way the organization operates. At her hearing, she repeatedly refused to condemn that organization, that center, labeling mainstream groups that it disagrees with as quote-unquote hate groups. She claimed that she had nothing to do with the center's defamatory hate group label, but she told the committee that she was responsible for overseeing special litigation, including against hate groups. She also claims to be overseeing all the organization's legal programmatic work. She even included in that LGBTQ rights issues. The center is involved in a case about state law regulating transgender medical treatment for children. The district courts of Alabama are looking into whether the center engaged in what's called judge shopping. I don't know of another nominee that we voted on when we knew a court was investigating possible misconduct. Conveniently, the nominee says she has no involvement in, quote, the filing of complaints, the briefings, or any oral arguments, end of quote. That's the entire case, so it's not clear what she means when she oversees cases. Ms. Choudhury has made numerous statements critical of law enforcement. At her hearing, she told Senator Kennedy that she had said that police killings of unarmed black men, in her words, happen every day in America. When police groups strongly opposed her, then she had what we call a confirmation conversion. After her hearing, she claimed she never made that statement, but she never explained why she thought it sounded like something she'd say. I also wanted to briefly address Natasha Merle's nomination. She claimed that voter ID and border wall are, quote, things that support or grounded in white supremacy, end of quote. And I thought it had something to do with the enforcement of the laws of this land. Nothing to do with whatever color of skin you have. And that's an outrageous claim against millions of Americans. And it just happens that voter ID is supported by 80% of the Americans. She also said that deploying federal law enforcement personnel to protect the federal courthouse in Portland in July 2020 was, quote, completely unprovoked and unnecessary. She wrote that ridiculous statement after rioters had been targeting the courthouse for 2 weeks. Rioters even threw balloons full of accelerant into the courthouse and tried to light it on fire with large commercial fireworks. They knew federal agents were in the building at the time. Now think of that. You're doing that to a federal building, threatening that life. And it was something that was completely unprovoked and unnecessary, in her words. With their activist records, I don't believe these nominees will respect the rule of law and follow the law as written. So I'm going to oppose them. I also want to comment on the bill on markup today, the Public Safety Officers Support Act. The mental health of our law enforcement officers and first responders is vital to their ability to continue to protect and serve. That is why I've introduced legislation focusing on this issue, like Fighting PTSD Act, which advanced out of the committee last week to help law enforcement and first responders get help that they need for trauma that they experience on the job. However, I've heard from an important constituency of the public safety officers that the Public Safety Officers Support Act contains some provisions that concern them. So I'd like to continue working with the bill's sponsors to see if we can get all public safety officers comfortable with the bill. I'm also concerned not only that this bill lacks a CBO score, but also that it may price well into the billions. It seems to me we need to know what the cost is. We should know exactly what we're voting for. I'll vote to advance the bill today, but it appears there may still be some work that needs to be done in order to get it through the floor of the Senate. I yield.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. I've been asked to accommodate one of my colleagues here, former chairman, and to go slightly out of order and to bring this nomination of Judge Michelle Childs to the D.C. Circuit first. And I'm going to grant that request. With 16 years of judicial, practical, administrative law experience, Judge Childs is highly qualified for this position. Since 2010, she's presided over almost 5,000 cases, including 60 trials as a district court judge. 4 years before that, she presided over thousands of cases during her years as a state court judge in South Carolina. Brings practical experience with administrative law to the D.C. Circuit, which hears more administrative law cases than any other. Prior to joining the bench, Judge Childs administered federal and state programs as the deputy director of a South Carolina agency, administrative law judge for the South Carolina Workers' Compensation Commission. She's been rated well qualified by the ABA, and I'd also note that Senator Graham strongly supports her nomination. I hope all my colleagues will join me in supporting her. Does anyone seek recognition to speak on her behalf? Senator Graham.
Very quickly, Senator Grassley, thank you very much for your overview of Judge Childs' record. She's been a district court judge in our state for 10 years. From every corner of the legal community, she's highly respected. Again, from my point of view, she is somebody will have been chosen by a conservative Republican, but in my view is somebody highly qualified to do the job. I have nothing but great respect for her and her family, and I appreciate the support of my Republican colleagues. I think Senator Scott would echo what I'm saying here, so I enthusiastically support this nomination.
No one else seeks recognition. The question on favorably reporting the nomination of Juliana Michelle Childs to the U.S. Circuit Judge for the District of Columbia. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy.
Aye.
Mrs. Feinstein.
Aye.
Mr. Whitehouse. Aye. Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal. Aye. Mr. Rono. Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Grassley.
Aye.
Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Fleming.
Aye.
Mr. Lee.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Sass.
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Powell.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Phillips.
Aye by proxy.
Mrs. Walker.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Chair.
Chair.
Aye.
Chair Dorgan votes with 17 yeas, 5 nays.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Now we'll consider the nomination of Nancy Abudu to the 11th Circuit. She's been rated well qualified by the ABA. A civil rights and voting rights litigator for over 15 years, she has significant trial and appellate experience, including arguing 5 cases before the Federal Court of Appeals. As a civil rights litigator, she's dedicated a significant part of her life to defending religious liberty. For example, she represented a Hasidic Jewish police officer who alleged he was forced to work on the Sabbath and to violate religion-based dietary belief. And as she explained at her hearing, as a voting rights litigator, she has, quote, represented a lot of Christian individuals in particular whose faith has served as foundation for how they've been able to continue in their march for access to equal justice. Some of my Republican colleagues have criticized Ms. Abudu for statements she made as an advocate in the past. This is an issue that comes up frequently before this committee. During the last administration, the committee considered multiple judicial nominees who had spent their careers as advocates at conservative legal organizations and as advocates for conservative causes. In those cases, my Republican colleagues stressed that nominees should not be held to account for advocacy they undertook as an attorney, whether that advocacy was in the form of a brief or op-ed or other public commentary. At the same time, Republican members of the committee defended those nominees, lauding them for their zealous advocacy. And Republicans took Trump nominees at their word when they testified under oath they understood the difference between a role of an advocate and a judge. Ms. Abudu was asked that very same question under oath, and here's what she said. I understand that as an advocate, your responsibility is to zealously represent your client's interest within the bounds of law. However, as a judge, as I stated, it is to be fair, it is to be impartial, It is to make sure your decisions are clear and well-reasoned. My commitment to this committee is that if I'm fortunate to be confirmed, that's the kind of judge I'll be. Now, I find it hard to believe that Republican judicial nominees can set aside their role as advocates, but Democratic nominees cannot. It would be regrettable if there is a double standard. There's also been talk about Ms. Abudu's work with the Southern Poverty Law Center. As she explained repeatedly at both her hearing under oath and in written questions, she has no involvement, none, with how the SPLC designated hate groups. Instead, her role was in the legal department defending religious freedom, free speech, and voting rights. To impute the organization's work designating hate groups to her is not only misleading, I don't believe it's fair. Finally, I want to address a request from committee Republicans to delay consideration of her nomination until a three-judge panel in Alabama concluded its investigations into allegations that a litigation team engaged in, quote, judge shopping. Ms. Abudu has already made it abundantly clear she played no role whatsoever in this alleged incident. And she wrote in responding to a written question, I was not involved in the decision to voluntarily dismiss the Lidinsky case or the decision to refile. Therefore, I cannot explain the decision to refile. More broadly, as my Republican colleagues have acknowledged, Ms. Abudu unequivocally condemned judge shopping at her career. Given those responses, unequivocal responses, we will proceed with the vote today. Does anyone seek recognition on Ms. Abudu's nomination? On favorably reporting the nomination of Nancy Abudu to the U.S. Circuit Judge for the 11th Circuit, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy.
Aye.
Mrs. Feinstein. Aye. Mr. Whitehouse. Aye. Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Mr. Green. Aye. Mr. Blumenthal. Aye. Mr. Rosenblatt. Mr. Choudhury.
Aye.
Mr. Bonilla. Aye. Mr. Alba. Aye. Mr. Grassley.
No.
Mr. Graham.
No.
Mr. Coyne. No. Mr. Lee. Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Bass.
No by proxy.
Mr. Rowley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy. No. Mr. Tillis.
No by proxy.
Mrs. Laverne.
No by proxy.
Chair Durant.
Aye.
Chair Durant. This is a tie vote, 11 yeas, 11 nays.
Committee's recorded a tie vote on Ms. Abudu's nomination to be U.S. Circuit Judge for the 11th Circuit pursuant to Section 3, subsection 1A of Senate Resolution 27 of the 117th Congress. I'll transmit to the Secretary of the Senate a notice of this tie vote. Under Section 3, Section 1B of that resolution, either the majority or minority leader may then make a motion to discharge the nomination. The next nomination is Judge Ana de Alba, Eastern District of California. Served as Superior Court Judge for Fresno Superior Court 4 years, presided over thousands of matters and 7 bench trials. Prior to joining the bench, Judge de Alba spent 11 years in private practice in Fresno. In addition to expansive state court practice, she also tried several administrative law trials. She made partner at the firm in 5 years. A native of San Joaquin Valley, Judge de Alba received her BA with the highest honors and her JD from the University of California at Berkeley. The American Bar Association has rated Judge de Alba qualified. She enjoys the strong support of 2 of our colleagues on the committee, Senator Feinstein and Padilla. Does anyone seek recognition to speak on her behalf? On favorably reporting the nomination of Ana Isabel de Alba to be U.S. District Judge for the Eastern District of California, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy.
Aye.
Mrs. Feinstein. Aye. Mr. Whitehouse. Aye. Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Mr. Green. Aye. Mr. Blumenthal. Aye. Mr. Rosenblatt. Mr. Booker. Aye. Mr. Bonilla. Aye. Mr. Alba. Mr. Grassley.
No.
Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Coyne.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Bass.
No by proxy.
Mr. Rowley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Tillis.
No by proxy.
Mrs. Laverne.
No by proxy.
Aye.
Chair Durant votes 12 yeas, 10 nays.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next, we consider Nusrat Choudhury, nominated to the Eastern District of New York. Ms. Choudhury is a graduate of Columbia University and Yale Law School, clerked on the district and circuit court levels, served as legal director for the ACLU, rated well qualified by the American Bar Association. Last week, my colleagues on the other side asked that I schedule a second hearing. I have denied that. Their concerns about Ms. Choudhury stem from an exchange she had with Senator Kennedy during her hearing. Senator Grassley referred to it as well. Senator Kennedy asked Ms. Choudhury whether she had previously made a statement that, quote, the killing of unarmed black men by police happens every day in America. To be clear, such a claim is unequivocally false. I believe the basis for Senator Kennedy's question was a tweet from a third party discussing her comments at a panel discussion 7 years ago. Ms. Choudhury said she didn't recall making the statement, had a back and forth with Senator Kennedy, which I witnessed and heard. Since her hearing and after further review, she sent the committee a letter and said, quote, I did not make this statement. I strongly disavow this statement. I regret not disavowing this statement during my hearing, and to be clear, the statement is not true. She went on to say, such statement is consistent with my deep respect for law enforcement, appreciation for the risks they take, and the important role they play in advancing public safety. It does not reflect the work I've done in partnership with law enforcement and their counsel to advance constitutional, effective, and safe policing in cities nationwide. In fairness, this is a challenging situation for the nominee. There was no record or transcript of the panel discussion she participated in, just a tweet from someone who was apparently in the audience. I've read her letter to the committee. She disavowed the statement. I believe she deserves the benefit of the doubt, and don't just take it from me. Take it from those who know her. For example, Thornton, Colorado Police Chief Terrence Garden wrote, while my encounters with members of the local ACLU were often adversarial, resulting from what I believe to be a bias against policing, Ms. Choudhury's approach was markedly different. I find it hard to reconcile the measured, reasoned attorney that I met with the inaccurate and unsophisticated statement attributed to her. Further statements supported her position and what she stated to the committee. I'll be supporting her nomination. Does anyone seek recognition to speak on this nomination? On favor will be reporting the nomination of Nusrat Jahan Choudhury to be U.S. District Judge for the Eastern District of New York. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy.
Aye.
Mrs. Feinstein. Aye. Mr. Whitehouse. Aye. Ms. Closer. Aye. Mr. Green. Aye. Mr. Lugo. Aye. Mr. Ramos. Aye. Mr. Booker. Aye. Mr. Padilla. Aye. Mr. Oswald. Aye. Mr. Grassley.
No.
Mr. Grant. Aye. Mr. Boyne. No. Mr. Lee.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Dunn.
No by proxy.
Mr. Rowley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cobb.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy. No. Mr. Tillis.
No by proxy. No by proxy.
Aye.
The votes are 12 yeas, 10 nays.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Finally, we consider the nomination of Natasha Merle to the Eastern District of New York, an experienced litigator at every level of our legal system, undergraduate degree from the University of Texas at Austin, law degree from New York University School of Law, completed 2 clerkships in the Southern District of New York and the Eastern District of New York. She devoted her early career to representing indigent clients, went on to work in private practice, including civil litigation. Since 2016, has worked at the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, devoting her practice to equal justice under the law. Taught at 2 of the nation's top law schools, Columbia and New York University. Tremendous amount of courtroom experience, rated well qualified by the American Bar Association. Does anyone seek recognition on behalf of Ms. Merle's nomination? On favorably reporting the nomination of Natasha Merle to be U.S. District Judge for the Eastern District of New York, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy.
Aye.
Mrs. Feinstein. Aye. Mr. Whitehouse. Aye. Ms. Closer. Aye. Mr. Cruz. Aye. Mr. Lugo. Aye. Mr. Rowley. Mr. Booker. Aye. Mr. Padilla. Aye. Mr. Oswald. Aye. Mr. Grassley.
No.
Mr. Grant. Mr. Boyne. No. Mr. Lee.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Dunn.
No by proxy.
Mr. Rowley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cobb.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Tillis.
No by proxy. No by proxy.
Aye. The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. We now consider S 3635, Public Safety Officer Support Act. The bill's sponsors have filed a manager's amendment. I'll speak briefly about the bill before calling up the manager's amendment. I want to start by highlighting a very disturbing fact shared by Senator Padilla with this committee just last week, and that is that more police officers die by suicide than by any other cause in the line of duty. The tragedy of officer suicide is felt by many, including the other officers who serve with them. It's particularly devastating for the families. In 2016, April Scherzer was in bed with her four-month-old twin daughters when she heard a gunshot. She ran downstairs and discovered her husband, Max, who had taken his life with a service weapon. April said of her husband's death, and I quote, "My day begins with that gunshot. I relive it over and over again, up until now, up until this present moment." Her husband, Max, was 36 years old and been a police officer 12 years before taking his life. I want to read a letter to the committee by a young girl, Riley Giles. She's writing about her dad, Corporal Jonathan Giles, served as an officer in a small police department in California. Here's what she said. "My dad passed away on November 7th, 2018 by suicide. My relation with my dad was super close, and when he died, the world was crushed at my age of 8 years of age. After my dad passed, his department said that they would be there for us. They were not. Officers that die by suicide are not treated the same as officers that die in the line of duty. I'm only 12 years old, and it hurts me so bad to watch my dad and other families get treated differently because of the way their loved ones passed. The families of officers who died by suicide should get the same benefits as families of officers that passed in the line of duty." That is a heartbreaking story from a little girl. It's time to take off the stigma of officers dying by suicide. It's time we honor these officers and their families. That's why this bill is so important. It extends the benefits of Public Safety Officer Benefits Program to job-related mental health incidents. I want to make one other point here. There was a valid question raised by Senator Grassley that we looked into as to whether this in any way encouraged suicide. We went to the advocacy groups who deal with this issue with real care, and they said it did not. They felt that it was more important for us to move forward and to help these families, and that concern they did not share. And that's the reason we went forward with scheduling this bill today. I support it. I understand there's a manager's amendment, OLL 22474. I'll now call up. With no objection, the manager's amendment is adopted. Senator Cornyn, do you wish to speak about the bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to recognize Senator Duckworth for her working with us on advocating for the Public Safety Officer Support Act of 2022. I also want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Grassley and others on the committee, Senator Tillis, Senator Booker, and Leahy in particular, for supporting this legislation that will provide essential benefits, mental health resources in particular, to first responders and their families. I was in Uvalde, Texas yesterday, where a whole community, a whole state, a whole nation are grieving, but it's our law enforcement officials that have to respond to those acts of violence, those incomprehensible attacks, and they're exposed to things that most of us can only imagine. And it has a challenging effect on their mental state of mind, and they need these benefits. Under current law, we provide disability and death benefits to law enforcement and first responders for physical injuries and suffered in the line of duty under the Public Safety Officer Benefit Program. The law does not currently recognize the reality that our first responders and law enforcement suffers mental health trauma and post-traumatic stress. Even in some instances, they decide to take their own lives because of the challenging jobs we ask them to do on a day in and day out basis. Like our troops who served in combat, members of our law enforcement community can carry with them invisible wounds. Public safety officers often endure traumatic events, as I said, and they are 54% more likely than the general population to die by suicide. Just like our service members, it's important for our first responders and law enforcement officials to be recognized and supported for the mental distress and trauma they endure while protecting our communities and responding to emergencies. This includes supporting their surviving families when they are gone with death benefits as well. I'm proud to have a variety of stakeholders supporting this legislation, including law enforcement organizations, first responders groups, mental health providers, and healthcare advocates. We've received an outpouring of letters from families of fallen officers who've died as a result of suicide. They tell us this legislation will not only help them with their grief, but they believe this will help take away some of the stigma associated with mental health and remove some of the pain that they feel and other families feel when a line of death duty occurs. I have 2 letters I'd ask unanimous consent to make part of the record, one from a long list of mental health providers and advocates, and another from a group of law enforcement supporters of this particular bill. I'd ask them to be made part of the record. So I hope the committee will swiftly pass this Public Safety Officer Support Act. When people say we can't do anything around here except on a partisan basis, this is proof we can and meet a real need. So I want to thank all my colleagues on the committee who joined in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. I want to thank you personally as well as Senator Duckworth, my colleague. Senator Leahy.
Well, Senator Durbin and Senator Cornyn, I agree with exactly what you had to say. I could not help but think back to my days as state's attorney and seeing suicides and just having to fight to try to get any compensation for the family. But coming into this building, I've had my office here for this is the 48th year. But for year after year after year, I'd walk in side door, be greeted by Officer Howie Liebengood. I had known Officer Liebengood from the days when he was a teenager. The courtesy and professionalism shown by him was always touching. I could come in the day when it seemed like everything is going wild. Getting his greeting, I felt better about the day. He was the same way when my wife would come here, or my children, and even grandchildren. He'd call them by name and greet them. We had the January 6th insurrection. The pressure on Howie was so strong. He went home, ended his own life. You know, he served the Capitol and the U.S. Capitol Police throughout all those years, and all kinds of hours, all kinds of time. There wasn't a single senator who came through here who didn't appreciate who he was. As I said, I'd known him since he was a teenager, and he'd come up here with his father, Howard Liebengood. So that's all I have to say, but people like that, we have to do something for them.
Senator Coons and Senator Blumenthal seek recognition. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairman Durbin. I want to thank Senators Cornyn and Duckworth for their work on this bill and the opportunity to join with them. I agree that the trauma that our law enforcement officers, first responders are often exposed to in the line of duty is something where we have an obligation to do more to both identify and address the mental health challenges that they face, to reduce stigma, and I think the provision of death benefits is an important step in that direction. I do think that one important way we can help reduce the trauma to which law enforcement is exposed is by taking positive steps forward to make it harder for those who would do harm to themselves and others to get access to weapons of war. I can only imagine how the law enforcement officers and first responders who went to Robb Elementary School will be burdened for the rest of their lives with the grisly scene that they saw there. Like Senator Leahy, I knew Officer Howie Liebengood. He was a cheerful, charming, engaging, positive, daily moment of joy. Those of us who came through the doors here at Russell Senate Office Building knew him well, and it left quite a mark for those of us who grieved his loss by suicide, and it was a stark reminder of the ways in which a line of duty death is treated differently when that death is by suicide, and how we are still struggling to find the right ways to honor and connect the families and those who've left behind or lost a member of law enforcement, where instead of it being at the hands of others, it was at their own hand. But let me just conclude by saying, as all of us are struggling with what we can do together to address the tragic incident in Uvalde, Texas, doing more to help law enforcement confront trauma and doing more to ensure that trauma is less likely to happen is what our constituents and justice demands of us. Thank you.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to commend Senator Cornyn and Senator Duckworth for their leadership on this measure and ask that I be added as a co-sponsor.
Without objection.
I was at Sandy Hook in Connecticut on the afternoon of the shooting there, and I will never forget the parents, but also the law enforcement officers who had to go into that building, first responders who had to investigate. We think of investigation as a sterile, detached activity, but everyday police officers, first responders, see and experience things that change their lives. And often we are unaware of how deeply they are affected and how much they care. So I think this measure is a very constructive start in trying to provide more care for them. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting us go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Whitehouse.
Let me just associate myself with Senator Blumenthal's remarks. I support this terrific piece of legislation, but it's also a reminder of the investments that we need to make to help police officers and first responders before they get to the point of contemplating suicide. Thank you.
Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I, too, would like to be added as a co-sponsor.
Without objection.
And just briefly acknowledge, I actually thank Senator Grassley for his question about this bill and whether or not it would inadvertently encourage someone who's struggling to consider suicide. I'm thankful for the chair to have done the homework and gotten the response back from survivors and from advocates. And I think the upside here is, as we are moving to better support families, deservedly so, the fact that this is in play should lead to more conversation, should lead to better understanding. And it's not just among law enforcement officers, but society as a whole. We still have a lot of stigma to overcome when it comes to mental health struggles. So if this further adds to that improved awareness and understanding and empathy, I think it can only lead to more people seeking out the help that they need before they take that drastic, tragic decision. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Senator Padilla.
Can I say something?
Of course, Senator Grassley.
I think maybe there was a misunderstanding about the issue I raised about what this might do to suicide generally. It was based on just a question that has come up that I think we ought to think about, and that is, could this cause some people, because of the payout, to commit suicide? That's just not a rhetorical question. I think it's a legitimate thing to consider.
I agree, Senator, and we treated the question seriously and carefully, and as Senator Cornyn has indicated, went to the mental health groups to get their considered opinion, and I feel that moving forward is the right thing to do. But I don't question your raising that issue. I think it's a valid question. If no one else, Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you. I also want to thank Senator Duckworth Cornyn for this bill. Having just spent the day yesterday with you, Mr. Chairman, and you, Senator Booker, at the White House when the President signed the executive order with regard to federal officers and some of the changing practices in light of the murder of George Floyd in my state, I was heartened that there were so many police officers there, leadership of nearly every police group joining in this effort on training. And I think we can't divorce what's been going on in the last few years with our police departments and mental health and the need to continue to work on racial justice issues while at the same time realizing that we are down officers, that a lot of people have left, and that we can do two things at once. We can continue making reforms and changes, but also boosting up our police officers. And I'm certainly, as chair of the Rules Committee, I know all the numbers on what's happening in our own department here in the Capitol. We have increased morale. We've made some really good changes. We have a new police chief in place, but we're still down officers, significantly down officers, as we are in every single major city. So I'm hoping as we move forward, not only on the mental health front and on the equipment front and on the training front, as was so clear in our discussions yesterday at the White House and the standards, but we also remember that it makes your job harder when you don't have enough police officers, and we're going to have to continue to recruit and find other ways to get and retain police officers. We need them, and certainly their burden is much greater when they don't have enough people on their force. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. And I'd like to ask consent to enter into the record a letter which I think is very important from major mental health organizations in support of this bill. And if you just bear with me for a minute, I'd like to read something to you that I found particularly to be a revelation. It is also, this is from many different organizations, almost 20 different organizations. It is also crucial that we support the families of public service officers impacted by suicide, many of whom face financial struggle. Research tells us that survivors of suicide loss face a higher risk of suicide after the death of their loved one. Moreover, financial hardship is a major risk factor for suicide. It is for these reasons that the undersigned national organizations come together in support of this urgently needed legislation to assist these families in time of grief and help avert future tragedies. Without objection, I'll enter that in the record. Anyone else seek recognition? If not, on favorably reporting S 3635 as amended by the manager's amendment, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Majority of the members present having voted in the affirmative, the ayes have it. The bill will be favorably reported to the floor. And with that, this meeting of the Senate Judiciary Committee is adjourned.